Welcome to Loud and Clear, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of women in music. I'm your host, Olivia Adams, and spring is just around the corner and many musicians are gearing up for music auditions, or teachers are preparing their students for auditions. So today I'm talking with Lili Roussakis all about preparing for auditions. Lili is a musical theater performer, voice teacher, and audition prep coach. In 2019, Lili completed her Bachelor of Music honors in Music Theater and Voice with a minor in Drama Studies from Carleton University. Wanting to further her music education, Lili completed the CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute based out of Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia. Continuing on with her pandemic education, she completed her graduate diploma in arts management from Queen's University in 2021. As a teacher, Lili has helped many teenagers and young adults be present in their authentic voice. Her main focus is to help students achieve mindful acceptance of where they are right now in their journey and develop their unique sound and perspective so that they can feel confident and in control while performing. Welcome, Lili. How are you?
Oh, thank you. That was so amazing to hear back. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Before we hit record, we were just reminiscing about how we used to work at the same place years and years ago when I first moved to Ottawa. But anyway, I'm pleased to be talking music auditions with you. I love following your Instagram and learning about all of the audition prep advice that you give and feedback. It's so wonderful. So I knew when I wanted to do one on auditions and spring preparations that you were someone I wanted to have on. So I wonder if we could start off by having you tell us a little bit more about what led you down the path of becoming a musician.
Yeah, absolutely. I always kind of say that I just wasn't good at anything else when I was younger. So it just kind of led me to be here. In part, that was what it was. But yeah, I always had an interest in music, singing specifically. I've been singing since I was very young. I came from a musical family with my mom who put us all in music lessons growing up. So I was always exposed to music and doing music camps, things like that. I don't know, just all around lots of music in the household. So when it became time to make those decisions at the end of high school as to where to go next, I considered a lot of options, but nothing really sparked my interest as much as going into music. So that's when I decided to go to Carleton, like you just mentioned. It's been ongoing ever since.
It just seemed like the obvious path for you.
For sure. I mean, I think it's just been a big part of my life for so long, and I just didn't really see myself doing anything else.
For sure. Well, you're a wonderful music teacher and a vocal coach, and your studio is called Present Over Perfect Studio. Am I right?
Yeah, Present Over Perfect Performance Studio. It's a lot of P's, but it's a good time.
I love that motto. What does that mean for you as an educator and also for your students? And how did you kind of come into that motto for your work as a teacher?
Yeah, for me, I found a big part of what I was teaching my students before I even started my own private studio was awareness of where they were in that current moment in time in their singing journey, and just kind of working within those boundaries, but also expanding those boundaries as time went on. And I found that was kind of what my teaching style ended up becoming, just through my own background as a singer and my own experiences, feeling very trapped in having perfect technique and just kind of striving towards that throughout my life. So just trying to advocate for others that it's not necessarily always about having the most amazing, beautiful technique, even though it's great to have, of course, and I support it, but just really acknowledging your current place and being aware of where you are right now, because singing is in a lot of ways very different to learn than any other instrument because it's a part of you. So there's a lot of other factors at play that a lot of people don't take into account.
Yeah. Certainly. I think in classical music, especially, there's this idealism or this, we can almost make an idol out of perfection. And I remember reading a book on piano practicing, and I don't even remember who the author was, but he said something along the lines of, don't reach for perfection. Perfection is for the gods and they will kill you if you try to reach it.
Yeah. And it is very interesting in music education that there's always seems to be this end goal of having perfect technique or being able to sing your song as perfectly as possible. Like just this idea of being perfect, which in so many other aspects of life, there's this understanding that you will never be perfect. But for some reason, in my experience, there's just been a lot of that attitude towards music education. And I'm just thinking, why? You know, this is all supposed to be for fun. It's a pastime that you are maybe investing a bit more time into than anything else. But, you know, it should all be for fun. Why is there this stress surrounding being perfect? Like, I just never, So in my studio, and, you know, my students still struggle with it, obviously. We all do.
We all do.
But we all do. But I definitely like to keep everything grounded. Mm-hmm. And just bring it back to like the reality, the current reality that you're living in of like, okay, let's assess our situation and figure out if you're feeling frustrated about how you're progressing, like why, what's holding you back? What are your roadblocks and how can we work around them or work through them? Let's talk about it.
Certainly. I was teaching some lessons last night and, you know, high schoolers have just gone through their finals, right?
Yes.
And I got lots of really frantic explanations of I didn't practice this week because I was studying for my chem final. And it was just this, you know, word vomit of, you know, this is the reason why it's not perfect this week. And I was like, all right, good to know. High school finals are here. You're in grade 12. That should be your focus right now, right?
Yeah.
So it's okay because the goal isn't perfection or even you don't need to be making progress that week because of certain circumstances that are surrounding your situation, right?
Absolutely. And I've encountered so much of that in my own life too, just feeling very apologetic and feeling badly for not progressing quickly enough, especially in a post-secondary education space where, you know, you have juries, you have all these like final performances that you have to prepare for, and they expect a certain level, like year after year, you need to be progressing like a certain amount. Mm-hmm. And if you're not, there's kind of this expectation that you're not working hard enough, which there could be some truth to that, but there could also be other factors at play. And I find just with my own teaching and my own studio and my own students, I just want to encourage this environment of like growth at whatever speed makes sense for you.
Yes. Yeah, certainly. So if a student comes to you and is in that perfection mentality, they're preparing for an audition for an upcoming show or a college audition, what would you say to them in that moment of feeling stressed about the perfection?
I would say to them, utilize that energy towards your performance in the audition. A good example I've used in the past, and this actually worked for somebody that I was working with, was they were feeling very anxious. So I literally gave them a piece where the character was an anxious character and they were pacing. And just like, it's just utilizing the energy that you're already bringing into the performance. So it's almost in some ways disguised as part of the performance. And this is one that I think everybody says to their students when they're nervous. The idea of your nerves mean that you care about the outcome, and to utilize that energy towards like your performance, whether that be actually applying it directly to the pieces that you're working on, or help that motivate you to make sure everything is ready to go. Like, obviously we can't expect that it'll go perfectly because there's always things that'll go wrong no matter how much you prepare. Sorry to burst anybody's bubble, but to remember that you have done the preparation and allow those nerves and energy to just propel you forward, and don't mask it. Mm-hmm. Acknowledge it. Be mindful of where you're at.
Yes. Yeah. You have energy right? You have this excess energy and you can acknowledge that I'm feeling nerves, right? Nothing happens when you say it out loud. Sometimes it loosens the grip of the nerves a little bit when you say it out loud. So at the time of recording this, it is not springtime, but this episode will be aired around the springtime, which means that we're gearing up for auditions for shows. There are college auditions, there's music festivals and examinations. And this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on, as you speak a lot on your social media about preparing for auditions. What are some helpful tools that you can provide for preparing students for auditions, whether it be be shows, college programs, summer programs, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. I think a good one is to just know yourself as a performer. If, for example, in my work, I work with a lot of students who do musical theater voice. In that regard, if there's somebody who's preparing for an audition, let's say, I'd be like, okay, let's assess, like, what kind of characters do you feel comfortable playing? What do you want to demonstrate to the panel, right? Like, what kind of, do you want to be the ingenue? Do you want to be the comedic relief? Do you want to be the villain? Like, these are things to take into account, because if somebody says, I do like being the villain and I would love to show them that, then okay, let's prepare a song that a typical villain would sing. And then you can kind of demonstrate that character to them, so they kind of see that for you. So knowing who you are as a performer, I think, is really important. And that's my main piece of advice I'd give somebody, is kind of know who you are as a performer and to go from there and kind of choose pieces that work with that. Everybody is different. And I know in different genres of music, it's not as like character driven as like musical theater, for example, but there are certain composers I'm sure you're more compelled to perform than others. That's my biggest piece of advice, I would say, would be know yourself as a performer, prepare early.
Yes. Prepare early.
If you have any documents that can be done early, do it early. And it can be edited, right? It doesn't need to be perfect, but as long as there's something, and then it can be worked on as time goes on. Because the amount of times I've had people like 2 weeks before be like, oh my God, I haven't done my artist statement yet. And I'm like, you knew about that at the beginning. Why didn't you do that first?
Exactly. I was chatting with a young student. He's just entering his teenage years. And I was like, you've got to get on learning this piece. We're preparing it for something specific. And he was like, I don't work well until the deadline's close.
Oh, geez. I know. And then you have those people and you're like, I get it, but also I need you to work. I need you to prepare this sooner just for me, so I'm not feeling stressed about you and your lack of preparation.
Exactly. I always say, like, you're too young to have those ideas set in stone.
Who's telling you this is the way you work?
Absolutely. So what's something that you advise teachers against when preparing students for auditions? And you were saying, like, you specifically work with musical theater students. So let's gear that advice specifically towards teachers who teach musical theater and work in that realm.
Yeah, I would say, okay, this is kind of weirdly specific, but there is like a no-sing list of songs that panels have heard thousands of times that they just do not want you to sing at all. So I would say, don't give them songs from that list. There's so many of them that exist, there's like so many of those kinds of lists that exist out there. And it's growing every single day because there's always new stuff that's coming out and that's being done a bunch, and then they all just get sick of it and they're like, oh, I never want to hear that again. But on the flip side of that, if a student has one of those songs and it's like their best song and they sound amazing doing it and they can do it in their sleep, you could risk it and see how that goes. And also I would say to not box in your students as a specific type. Like I was mentioning earlier, having that conversation with a student about which characters they feel most comfortable portraying. There's also the other side of that where you can pigeonhole somebody to be something specific because that's how you view them as the teacher. Mm-hmm. And they may feel like they may agree with you, but in an audition setting, you want to be the most well-rounded performer and you want to demonstrate different sides of yourself. So try not to do, pieces. If you have to do 2 different pieces, try not to do pieces that are very similar to each other or have similar themes, things like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's funny that you bring up the no sing list because there's something similar to that in piano.
In every genre of music.
On the rare occasion, I have adjudicated a Fur-Elise that was spot on, absolutely fantastic. I had almost nothing to say. And, that happens. But sometimes you're right that there's like, if it's a really, really strong piece, then that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not going to blow your audition because they're there to hear you sing, right? And assess your voice and not necessarily assess your song selection quite as much.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And like, I've been on many on an audition panel as well. And I've heard many of songs on the no sing list, and there have been some that I've been like, it was fine. It didn't blow me away. But then there are some that I was like, oh, that's a really new way of interpreting that piece. Or they sang it beautifully and it just fits them exactly right. As much as there is the list of songs not to do, I wouldn't be opposed to hearing it myself. because if you are coming in and that's what you're confident in doing, who am I to tell you, no, stop. Please choose another piece.
Exactly. And I think that it can be almost hypocritical as teachers when we're saying, oh, don't perform that because it's been so overdone. When if we look at symphonies, like look across Canada and see how many times Beethoven's Fifth is being performed, right? And it's one of the most famous pieces of music and people still play it every single year.
Yeah, for sure. It happens all around. So it's a bit of an interesting topic that could be looked at and maybe analyzed a bit more as to like why we put that out there. And a lot of people know that as like subconsciously as like a part of their learning. But I'm like, I'm not opposed to it. If somebody is auditioning though, specifically for like a school, I sometimes will, I'll caution them and be like, hey, it's a nice piece. Don't get me wrong. It's pretty popular right now. Mm-hmm. The question is, do you want to be compared to somebody else performing that piece? Sometimes we're like, no. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's considering looking at something else.
Exactly. Right. Sometimes I tell my students, if they're going into competitions and stuff, something that people don't know as well, because then that exact thing, you're not being compared and the audition panel will remember you a lot of times because you played something unique that they hadn't heard before. Interesting. Well, I love that on your Instagram, you talk about debunking these audition myths. So in your experience, what are like the top myths that musicians believe about auditions?
That they need to be perfect.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It all comes back to perfection. You need to be perfect, that everything needs to be exactly right, just as you rehearsed it. Because at least I know from my own experience being on an audition panel, also in any school audition, they're looking for the potential that you have. They're not necessarily looking for you to be amazing, perfect right off the start. Because especially for a school, if you're auditioning and you're already amazing, why are you going to school? Why are you auditioning here? But regardless. Yeah, but the big one is that it needs to be perfect and amazing, and you can mess up. When I was doing auditions for post-secondary schools, like I was a mess. I messed up in every single one. And the ones that I really thought I would not, there was no way I got in. So there's a myriad of factors that go into it as well. The audition is one part of it. And to remember that it's not the whole experience, right? There's other things that go into play. Yeah.
Yes, I fully agree. And your future is not necessarily riding on a...
Oh, yes. I agree with that. That's a myth. There you go. That's a good one. That's a myth. Yeah, because a lot of times and I felt this when I was auditioning for schools too. It was, if I don't get into the school, it's the end. Mm-hmm. No, not at all. There are so many other schools, or you could even like re-audition next year if you don't get into any this year. Like there are so many other options for you. And just because you're not, just jumping in from high school to university right away, doesn't mean that it's the end and that you can't like try again or go in a different direction, whatever. It's all good.
Yeah. That whole like, let's take a deep breath.
Yes.
10 minutes is not going to define my future. I remember feeling that when I was first auditioning for my undergrad. And I was like, if I don't get in, I'm never going to go to grad school and I'm never going to become a pianist and no one will take me seriously. And I just remember someone saying like, no, that's not true. They were just like, no.
No, because there's just so much of your life, especially when you're so young. And it's hard because that's probably the most important thing that has ever happened to you in your life at that point in time. So there is a lot for a 17-year-old that's riding on that. So I can understand that perspective because I was there. But however many years later, life's going good. I ended up getting that degree and doing things now that are related to music. So it's all a journey. Mm-hmm. And that's, I find with like my studio philosophy, it's very holistic, mm-hmm. which in my experience is like a new age way of teaching where we're like, let's think about the whole person, not just their output like musically. Because that was not my experience growing up. That's where my mindset comes from. Like, I didn't have that when I was growing up, so I want to provide that for others.
Certainly. I remember experiences in which I had coaches say, you should feel anxiety the night before your performance. What? And now I'm like doing mindfulness practice with my students and like very zen. And
I think a lot of the newer teachers, newer, younger, whatever you want to call yourself, they come from a place of like, I didn't have this kind of person when I was your age. Mm-hmm. So I want to do that for others. And I think that's great because, again, it's all about having fun, having a good time, learning something new, but not feeling overly stressed about learning something new. We should all be enjoying ourselves.
I mean, we're making music. We should be enjoying ourselves, right?
I know.
Especially, I always tell my youngest students that too, because, they often will put so much pressure on themselves. And I'm like, you're 7 and we're just here to enjoy this, right?
You're 7. You are 7 years old. It's okay.
There will be plenty of things to put pressure on later in life. This is not one of them, So I know that we also have a lot of pianists that listen to this podcast. And so I was wondering if you have any advice for the audition pianist, because it's this unique experience where often a singer will come in, they'll have never sung with the pianist before, and the pianist doesn't know your tendencies yet, right? That you don't have that relationship. And it's just one of those necessary things in auditions. So how can pianists best support the musicians that they're playing with?
I love this question. This is my favorite thing to talk to my students about.
Awesome.
I love it because I remember growing up, I had no idea how to communicate what I needed. So actually, I had a workshop about that back in October, and it was so much fun. Everyone had a blast. I would say to a pianist who is trying to find the best ways to support the singer, follow their lead as much as possible. If they're pushing the tempo, go a little faster. If they're trying to slow it down, as they're singing, take it down a bit. Of course, we hope to have the conversation before of okay, what's the tempo of this piece? Are there any dynamic changes? Are there any tempo changes? Do you need me to bring out the melody in a certain section? Whatever, all those little intricate details, so at least they can be aware. And I always tell my students too, hey, be mindful of what you need for yourself. Do you want the pianist to play the melody out here so you can have that for yourself if you need it, kind of thing? Things like that. Definitely following the student's lead or the singer's lead, but also for themselves, maybe if they are newer to accompanying, making sure that they have this basic tools to be able to communicate that to the singer, so knowing to ask for the tempo, playing them their starting note if that's what they need, things like this, so that if the singer doesn't necessarily know how to communicate it, the pianist can kind of push that conversation along.
I think in particular, if you're working with younger students, right, who are preparing for maybe a show audition or something like that, where they don't have that experience of having done that before, it's really important to be a support in that scenario. Yeah. I
kind of create those situations in a low-key, low-stress environment of a workshop for the studio, or even a recital just for family and friends, where they only have 10 minutes to talk to the accompanist. They don't really have a big rehearsal time, so they can practice. The accompanist has the piece of music in front of them, and that they need to not necessarily rehearse it fully, but be able to communicate those things with them. And I also try to be there to act as supportive. Okay, do you need, there's a tempo change at bar 55, right? Make sure you tell her that. Make sure she knows, those kind of things. So they just get more practice doing it. And again, it's just practice. They go out in auditions and learn how to communicate with the accompanist better, or the accompanist. Try and accompany as much as you can so you can gain the experience of being able to talk to the singers and support them as best you can.
You're preparing for a performance or an audition. Do you have a routine?
I would say I do. It's honestly pretty low key. I get a little nervous, but I kind of detach myself as much from it, just so in the sense of not having it affect how I feel about myself or my value, and just thinking of it as an experience, and then you do it and then it's done, and then we wait for the results, and it is what it is. Yeah, so I would say making sure I eat, hydrate, warm up, body and voice, and also mindfulness, exercises, mantras, things like that, to just kind of get yourself in the right headspace. Make sure I have enough time to travel to the location. Make sure I find parking well in advance. It's nothing too elaborate. I don't have a very specific, set of things I need to do in order for an audition to go well. I just make sure that my song is prepared, ready to go. And also warm up is the big one as well. Those are the two main ones.
Certainly. I'm always curious to see what other people's pre-performance routines are, because I think that musicians are a lot I don't want to compare us to Olympians, but pattern, this routine that we go through before we do the thing. And then we often assess afterwards, so whenever the Olympics are on, summer or winter, I always show my students see how they did their warm-up routine, then they went and they dove, and then they immediately went and then they assessed, right? And then they went to relax. And so that sort of like, can we follow that same formula? Because everyone's going to have a different one, but it's always interesting to hear about other musicians' formulas so that it sort of helps to get us in a headspace.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that completely. I would say that, at least in my experience as a singer, a lot of my students want to be on Broadway one day, which, more power to them. They achieve that goal. That's amazing. But those are vocal athletes. Absolutely. They are singing 8 times a week, every week. So they definitely need to have a ritual and a certain kind of schedule that they follow every single day in order to make sure they're in the best shape. And if I can encourage singers to kind of adopt something in the meantime that will help build towards their goals and help them be, the best overall well-rounded performer, I think that's great. Everyone's different. So I'm never going to be like, you must eat breakfast at 7 a.m. and then you must warm up by 8 a.m. and things like this. Like, it's all relative. So as long as they come up with something that works for them, I think that's great.
Certainly. That's great. Well, do you have anything getting you excited in your musical life right now?
Just watching my students prepare and grow and seeing them grow as people, but also as singers is super cool. Preparing for the Kiwanis Music Festival is always a good time. Yeah. Preparing those pieces has been fun. Just doing some group numbers too. This will be the first time it'll be in person since the pandemic, which will be really exciting. So they'll actually be able to perform it live, which will be fun.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. We're going to wrap up with a few rapid fire questions. I'm asking everybody the same 5 questions in this season of the podcast. So no wrong answers, just go with your gut. Can you point to a moment when you knew you wanted to be a musician?
Yeah, when I started teaching.
Do you have a favorite song to perform?
Do I have a favorite song to perform? Sure. It's called I'm Not Afraid of Anything by Jason Robert Brown.
What's good music or career advice you can pass on to other musicians?
I think the best thing you could do for yourself is be yourself and promote that and nourish that part of yourself, because there are so many people doing a lot of similar things. The thing that's going to convince like a student to go to you as opposed to somebody else is your personality, your philosophy for teaching, whatever. So really hone in on your uniqueness.
I love that. What music are you listening to right now?
Oh my gosh. My students' music for teaching. Definitely. You know what? I'm not a music listener when I'm not teaching. I'm not going to lie. I listen to podcasts, so I'll be listening to this.
That's super fair. I have to say, I probably listen to podcasts more than I listen to music as well.
At this point, yeah.
I listen to music several hours a day, or I'm playing music several hours a day, right?
Yep.
It's just a lot of music whirling around all the time. And so sometimes I need a different medium.
I agree 100%.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. I will have links to all the music and things that we reference in the show notes. Lili, can you let our audience know where they can find you and keep up with all the wonderful things that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I am mostly active on Instagram at Lili Roussakis. And you can find all my wonderful content that's available, free stuff that's available there. You are more than welcome to reach out to me through there as well to ask me about lessons or any of the workshops that I put on as well. I'm always happy to chat, so feel free to send me a message.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And thanks so much to Lili for coming on the podcast this week. And because we are in Audition and music festival season, I am just wishing everybody a wonderful experience. I hope that if you are participating in festivals as a teacher, that you have really enjoyable time. For all our adjudicators, I hope you've listened to our episode last week and you have a wonderful time adjudicating these fabulous young musicians. And for all of you who are spectators, enjoy all of the music. As always, you can find links to everything we referenced in the show notes of the podcast. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating or written review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra for sponsoring this podcast. Make sure you head over to saskatoonsymphony.org to purchase tickets for upcoming shows. And if you don't live in the Saskatoon area, you can watch these shows via concert stream by following the link at the top of the website. I'm your host, Olivia Adams. This is Loud and Clear, and you can find me at OA Music Studios on socials. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.